I'm Jody Emery. I'm Marc Emery's wife, and he's actually just doing a little interview with the news out there. But I do typically introduce him at various speaking engagements to explain how I got to know about him and why I would like you to help bring him back to Canada as soon as he starts his prison sentence. So when I first started finding out about marijuana, I was actually in high school. I used to be very anti-drug. I was a leadership star student. I was close to the principal and every teacher, and they all expected me to do great things. And my friends who were the stoners read Cannabis Culture magazine and watched something called Pot TV. And they knew about this guy named the Prince of Pot, Marc Emery. And I thought, well, that's an interesting character. So I read the magazine and checked him out online along with all the other Vancouver personalities in the activism scene. And I began to realize that my stoner friends were actually more critically minded, intelligent, and aware than my teachers and my fellow students were. And I became very frustrated with the fact that my teachers and fellow students just seemed to follow a very narrow line and didn't think outside the box and didn't ask questions. And my teachers were all saying, don't ask questions, just, do the tests. They didn't really encourage a lot of question asking, and my friends who smoked pot did. And they knew about everything going on in the world. They knew about the war in Afghanistan and Iraq and everything that was happening around the world, and no one else was talking about these things, about the oil wars and about pharmaceutical companies and about the military-industrial complex and these very important issues. And so I decided, well, maybe I'll try a little bit of pot. It's not hurting these guys. They're pretty intelligent. They're smart thinkers. They're not something I should be afraid of. And if they're smoking pot and that's helping them, then maybe I should try it and see how it works. And I did. I drank beer for the first time that night, too, and I just didn't care for it, so that didn't continue. But I got really involved in the scene. I really felt passionate about the fact that so many people are put in jail and arrested and their lives are ruined because of possession or relationship of any kind to a plant. And nobody should be going to jail for a plant. It's absolutely absurd. And not just any plant, but the most useful plant ever put on this earth, one that could end the oil wars. We could use it for fuel. We could stop cutting down our forests. We could replace so many very important parts of our industry with this plant that can save us, and therefore the phrase "hemp can save the world" is very true, and I take that to heart, and as does Marc. So when I started smoking pot and getting involved in this, and then I became kind of a teacher's nightmare because I didn't really want to go to class anymore. I didn't really want to listen to them, and to them I became a bad student, but really I feel I was becoming a good citizen in that I was asking questions and that I wasn't following the rules as they laid them out and expected us to follow them. So I moved to Vancouver ultimately to get to know Marc Emery and the fellow Vancouver activists. And I started by going to rallies and writing letters to the newspaper. Very simple things that most people do when they first get into the scene. And it became very personal when Marc went to jail in 2004 for passing a marijuana joint. And so when people say nobody goes to jail for pot, you can say they do. They can pass a joint and get 3-month sentences in jail. And that's what happened to Marc. And while he was there, he wrote every night. He would read a lot of books and he would do a lot of thinking. And every night he would write for a couple hours. And the next day he would call up to Pot TV and read aloud what he had been thinking about, what he was going through. And there'd be days where he was really angry and said, we should kill all our oppressors because they're trying to kill us. And then other days he would say, no, we need to forgive our enemies because they don't know how wrong it is what they're doing. But as he went up and down and through this time, every night when he would write those things and then record it, somebody had to transcribe it so everyone could read what he was writing and not just listen to it. So every night I would spend a number of hours listening to every word and typing them out and getting to know him very well and his mission and his history and why he was so devoted to what some people might think is pointless or silly, like why do you care about marijuana, people ask. And it's because it's not just about marijuana, it's about drug prohibition. It's about a war against people who are not hurting anyone else. And when you put someone in jail for a nonviolent crime when they're not hurting anyone else and they're just doing something to themselves, you know there's something seriously wrong in society. And when you have police officers and politicians and lobbyists working to make those laws even worse, to put even more people in jail, then we've really got to do something about that. And that's why we have information out there about Bill C-15. It's a new law being introduced, and our Senate has to pass it. It's almost law. And it's mandatory minimums. And we all know America is not a safe place. We all know that the United States is not a country we want to emulate. And yet our government, the Conservative government, is trying to do that by introducing these mandatory minimums. And that means if you get caught growing a couple plants and selling them to your friend who has AIDS or Crohn's disease or cancer, you will go to jail automatically. Even if the judge agrees that, yes, you did it medically and shouldn't go to jail, you didn't hurt anybody, you didn't have weapons, mandatory minimums require you go to law. And that's why so many Americans, 1 in 100 Americans, are in jail for drugs and for marijuana, and it's absolutely absurd. So Marc has been trying to change that for decades. He's been devoting his life and his money, and I just found him to be a very heroic figure. And when he was in jail, I did fall in love with him, got to get to know him a lot better in all these years. I've worked with him in Cannabis Culture magazine. I've run in provincial election campaigns for the BC Marijuana Party, but more recently I ran for the BC Green Party because they believe in ending prohibition. And now the federal Greens want me to run in the next federal election. So I owe a lot of this to Marc because he was very wise and gave me a lot of guidance and education, and I feel that I can help change things as everybody else can too. Because Marc is a leader himself, but he also inspires many others to become leaders too. So Marc has been doing a farewell tour across the country. We've gone to many different cities, and people have brought him, and we've had different crowds in different places, and he's a brilliant man with very wise words. So without further ado, here's your Prince of Pop, Marc Emery.
It's not like me to be stuck behind a microphone or so can you hear me now at the back? Am I clear? Okay, great. I'll talk like this. My name is Marc Emery, and this one is a bit different. This is the 23rd city on our farewell tour, because I am going to jail as soon as, and I expect to be going to jail on Monday, September 21st, early in the morning, turning myself in to a Seattle courtroom where I expect to be sentenced to a 5-year term in a federal penitentiary. And it's even worse than it sounds, because it's not just an ordinary federal penitentiary. If I were an American citizen in a U.S. federal penitentiary, I would at least be put into a work camp. And it's usually people with my severity of criminal activity, that is selling seeds, would be put in a work camp, a farm of sorts, and I would be working outside for the most part, as I'd be the lowest security risk. But unfortunately, in the United States, aliens, which is what I am, foreigners, or illegal immigrants, get put in special U.S. federal penitentiaries where all the aliens are put in together. So there's like 10 Canadians in a typical federal penitentiary for aliens and about 1,000 Mexicans, including many gang members and people from Honduras, Guatemala, Central America. And I'm sure there's a lot of not so bad people in those U.S. federal penitentiaries, but there's probably a lot of people too. And in fact, the 9 Canadians in California City federal penitentiary have been on lockdown for 54 days. And they've only gone outside of their little tiny cell for 1 hour a day for almost 2 months now because of the violence in the Mexican side of the prison between the rival gangs that are in there. So that's just an example of where. And right now, the Canadian government, under the Stephen Harper government, as my wife told you, a government very dedicated against the cannabis culture, somebody very much hostile toward the Stephen Harper and the Conservatives, they are not accepting marijuana prisoners back in transfers now. In the old days, before the Liberal government and earlier, all Canadians convicted in the United States would be transferred back to Canada automatically. But that's not happening now in the case of people who are convicted of smuggling marijuana in the United States or conspiring to help grow marijuana in the United States. So you're going to have to work really hard. That's perhaps my first and only request personally, is that when I am convicted, and by the way, you must bring me back by putting pressure on the Minister of Public Safety, currently a fellow named Peter Van Loan, and urge him to repatriate Marc Emery ASAP immediately and just get auto dialers and call him up and flood him with messages and get all your friends to call him until they can't possibly bear hearing it anymore, and they will transfer me back to Canada to a Canadian jail where Canadian sentencing principles will kick in, and a non-violent first-time offender in the federal system like myself on a 5-year sentence would be out in 10 months on day parole and 20 months on full parole. So it's a very better thing that you bring me back here as soon as possible. Now, how did this all happen? Because there's no victim here. There's nobody claiming I hurt them. There's nobody claiming anything bad happened to them as a consequence of my action. I can show, hopefully by the end of the night, you'll be convinced that I've brought more to this country, more to this province, perhaps more to this world, than almost anybody else alive. It's incredible. Like, one of the things I'm really proudest of, and I want to tell a Vancouver audience here, that I haven't bothered to even bring up across the country. You know, I've been in every province so far except New Brunswick speaking, and we've had people come from as far as St. John's, Newfoundland, to Nelson, BC, Thunder Bay, 200, 300, 400 people, sorry, 200 or 300 people at a time. Listen to me. But I've got some special things I want to tell this Vancouver audience. First of all, in the 20 years since I've been doing this revolutionary behavior, I came up with this idea called overgrowing the government in 1990. And it was a brilliant, brilliant idea, if I say so myself, the best one I've ever had, that we could somehow, because I thought, gee, even in 1990, I thought, man, millions of people have gone to jail for marijuana, and in fact, since the last 45 years, 29 people have been convicted of marijuana offenses, and 6 million people have gone to jail around the world, and 14 million of those people were charged in the United States, and over 2 million Americans have spent significant times in jail for marijuana. We've had 2 million Canadians criminalized in the last 45 years with convictions for marijuana, and we have 1,500 people in our Canadian jails at any one time for marijuana-related activity. So we have 70,000 people at any one time in the United States in jail for marijuana-related activity, and 250,000 people around the world in jail right now, as we speak, in the modern era, 2009, are in jail. 250,000, 250,000 people are in jail around the planet right now for marijuana. And there's 170 million people who smoke marijuana. So we're hunted down in every single place on Earth, 170 million of us. And how did this all happen? Because I only sold seeds to consenting adults over some invisible line that you don't even see from space. It doesn't exist. It's just one big planet with plants all over the place and prohibitions everywhere. And I decided to break this prohibition. I had a real scheme going. Because what we needed in the 1990s was a movement. We didn't have any movement. There was nothing. In 1990, I read a book called The Emperor Wears No Clothes by a guy named Jacques Herrera. And then somebody told me, guess what, Mark? It's actually banned in this country. I said, what? Yeah, don't you know what? I was a bookseller. I mean, I should have known. I don't know why I didn't know. But in 1989, books and magazines in Canada about marijuana had been banned for 2 years. High Time was taken off the newsstand. The RCMP went into the publishing headquarters of Blackberry Books in the 1980s, and actually seized all 5,000 copies of Grow Your Own Stone. Police seizing books, magazines stopped at borders. Things you wouldn't even think possible in a democracy were going on, and I couldn't believe it. And it took me 5 years. One of the first things I did, before I even developed this overgrow the government strategy, was I started breaking this literature law and trying to get charged by police departments throughout Canada, and so I could overturn this law in court. And eventually, we're giving out some brochures to students in North York, in secondary schools in Toronto, and we finally got charged with giving out illegal drug literature. And in fact, it was a pamphlet. It was called 10 Facts Every Parent, Teacher, and Student Should Know About Marijuana. And we were giving those out to students because what had happened at that high school, and happened so frequently at so many high schools throughout this country, is the police had recruited a hot young woman into the police services and decided to send her into a high school where, looking very mature, considering she was supposed to be 16 or 17 years old in this high school, looking very mature, went around and asked all the senior boys in the school if they could find marijuana for her. And of course, you ask any normal teenage boy, if you're a hot girl, which is what they do, send you to school, they all found weed for her. There was over 50 boys charged with finding weed for this one girl. And if you want to ruin lives quick, that's the fast way, because it was the same in 1990 when I gave out that brochure, 1995, as it is today. If you're a young person with a conviction for trying to find someone weed or marijuana, you can no longer travel to the United States. You can't go to a university in the United States. You can't be a trucker anymore. You can't get bonded anymore. You can't be a teacher now. You can't be a banker now. You can't be a security guard now. All of a sudden, a whole bunch of things in your life are all closed up to you. And this would happen at this high school in 1995, like it happened in Newfoundland in 2003 when I was there. And 50 young people's lives are automatically rendered much more difficult by the act of one police officer simply going around and asking vulnerable young men, if they could sell her some pot. And that's how we ruin lives. We manufacture so much crime that shouldn't exist in this country, and it drove me crazy. But here I was giving out this brochure to everybody in the high school so they knew what their rights were, so that this wouldn't happen again. And sure enough, the police charged us with informing them of the facts. Now, finally, I got to court, and in the Ontario Superior Court of Judge Ellen MacDonald, we overturned that very bad law. And to this day, that's why we have High Times on the newsstand. And that's why cannabis culture started existing. And that's why we have all these videotapes and newspaper discussions, because it's actually legal to discuss it. One of the things I found out that was so vital to this discussion about why is pot illegal. Because you've got to ask yourself, what is the public benefit to society from prohibition? We've had prohibition for 45 years. 2 million Canadians since 1965 have been rounded up. Lots of prime ministers and premiers have smoked pot, so they know it doesn't hurt them. Right? There's no evidence to show that it does hurt, and nobody's ever died from it. Right? We've got, and 5 to 7 million Canadians right now smoke marijuana. Canada has the highest per capita consumption of marijuana in the world. We have more pot smokers than any other place on earth. You know, the United Nations says 16% of all Canadians are smoked pot in the last year. And that's people who answered a phone survey. People called up on the phone, and 16% of all Canadians actually said to us, total stranger, yeah, I smoke weed. Like recently, actually, right? And so 60%, so it's got to be in the 20-25% area. Well, there's 30 million Canadians, and there's probably 20 million people over 20 years old. So I would dare say that 5 to 7 million Canadians in the last year have smoked marijuana, the highest per capita, consumption in the world. Our per percentage of population. That's pretty fantastic. So why is pot illegal? For example, even though 52% of all people in Canada want to legalize marijuana, or 62% of British Columbians want to legalize marijuana. Right now, according to the latest Angus Reid poll, not a single member of our Parliament has ever gotten up and said, Mr. Speaker, considering the majority of Canadians want to legalize marijuana possession, shouldn't we have a vote right now in the Parliament about this very vital issue? Why should we jail, for example, we're going to arrest 90,000 Canadians this year alone for pot, 50,000 for possession, about 20,000 for selling it, and about 20,000 more for growing it. And you know what? We're going to take away some people's houses. The government's going to take away their houses. They're going to take away their kids. Hey, you can be a rapist and a murderer. They don't take away your house or your kids. But if you grow pot in your house, if you grow a plant, they're going to take away your kids. They're going to take away your home. They can take away your car worth $5, $10, $15, $25,000 at the border if they find one joint. It's insanity. What's in that joint that's so dangerous that would require such a punitive thing? What's wrong with us? In other words, what's the explanation? When you ask politicians, you don't ever get one. When I go to a politician, I say, listen, what's the benefit? We spent billions and billions of dollars in 45 years. We arrested 2 million Canadians. Can you imagine that? We arrested the size of Montreal. Everybody that's living in Montreal right now has been arrested in the last 45 years, if you want to visualize it, for just pot. Billions of dollars spent, jails filled, families ruined and broken. And what was the benefit? What did politicians say was what you got in exchange? At least when people rail on about socialized medicine, you can say, well, at least we got medical help. Whatever the system might be, at least the doctors were there to help us. And that's what they say is the benefit. Everybody gets health care. Yeah, you pay lots of money in taxes, but everybody gets health care. Okay, so there's the benefit. Theoretically, for every government policy, there should be some benefit. What is the benefit for having hounded us like animals for 45 years? Who benefits? I want to know who is the person that actually benefits by such a policy. Because Canadians don't. Canadians absolutely do not benefit. All we've gotten is more gang violence, more gangs, more crime, more drugs of every kind than we've ever had before. Right? So it clearly doesn't address whatever problem they thought they were addressing. Right? And so 20 years ago, I thought, man, our people are really, really oppressed, so I've got to come up with some idea, some way that we can earn a lot of money. Right? And one of the things I wanted to teach people, too, is how to be good capitalists. The problem with the movement up to the 1980s and early 90s was they were all kind of like hippie people. Right? People that didn't even like money, that were socialists, and they didn't want to be responsible with money. They said, I would use money as a capitalist road. I said, that's the wrong attitude. We've got to have money, because we need to promote our point of view. We need to get our story out there, and that's only possible with things. And I started studying revolutionary movements around the world, and I found that every single movement that started with violence still continues to this day with violence. So you can't have a violent revolution. And I thought, what a perfect revolution would be is all about peace, all about unity. Would require no losers. It would have only winners. It wouldn't require violence. It wouldn't require intimidation or force. It wouldn't